indeed the case that one of the most poisonous effects domestically of the war on terror has been precisely to unleash a campaign of demonisation and general repression against the Muslim community in this country. And as Mohammed says, Stop the War Coalition is part of the Enough Coalition, and we will continue to stand by and to campaign with the Muslim community to do everything we can to stop the outrageous attacks that are taking place on Muslims. And our next speaker is sitting on my right. He's the president of the Stop the War Coalition. His name is Tony Benn, as you all know. And he, in fact, came and spoke at the Enough Coalition conference a couple of weeks ago. And I think it is just one more testimony to the man's principle and to his popularity, that at that conference, which was a 50% Muslim, 50% non-Muslim conference about Islamophobia, he probably got the biggest reception, the best reception of any of the speakers there. So give one more big reception to Tony Benn, President of the Stop the War Coalition.
Congratulations. It's the Stop the War movement itself and the people like yourself who've come to this meeting, because I think we have played a significant part in changing public opinion. We didn't stop the war because Blair had promised Bush he would go along with it. The Afghan war is still there, an unwinnable war. Now we're engaged in a war against Gaddafi in Libya, which is in deep trouble. And we have to see this in a very broad sense, that we need a world without war. We need a world where people cooperate. We need a world where people understand each other. And I'm very proud to be on the platform today with Tariq Ali and others, because they know it so well, and what they've been saying has made such a lot of sense. If you go back to the war against Afghanistan, it began following 9/11. And I think if we're really to make sense of 9/11, we have to see it as part of the Arab Spring, if you know what I mean. That the Arab world has been dominated by the superpowers for so long. Britain invaded Afghanistan in the 19th century. Then the Russians went into Afghanistan, the French controlled Syria, the Italians occupied Libya, Abyssinia in the 1930s. And the whole Arab world was dominated by Western imperialism. And I think to make it understand what led to what is now called the Arab Spring, what really led to that was a determination to be free and independent, and the use they chose of violence, which I understand but don't support, and that led to the Afghan war. And we went to Afghanistan because the Afghan government would not hand over Osama bin Laden to the United States. Well, Osama bin Laden is gone. Indeed, when I look at the death of Osama bin Laden, I see it as an act of terrorism, where people went in, an assassination squad went in and killed a man without any sort of trial. And extremism and terrorism are a feature of war. War is itself an expression of extremism and terrorism, and we have used that argument to our convenience, but of course others can see it from their point of view. The war in Afghanistan was an unwinnable war. The Russians couldn't win it with thousands of troops, and I don't believe we're going to be able to win it, but it locks us into combat with a very important strategic area in the world, even though there is no other ground for us being there. It is something that we can look at objectively, because we can see the tragedy involved, the number of deaths, the costs and all the rest of it. And that war's got to end, and it can't end by military means. Now we have the war in Libya, and I heard the Prime Minister announce the war, saying we're going to protect Libyan citizens from Gaddafi, but then you know, you don't have to have a very long memory to remember the time when Gaddafi, like many Arab dictators, was armed by the West. And therefore, this idea that we can present ourselves as the natural defenders of the Arab uprising is complete nonsense. It simply doesn't make sense to any Arab looking at the world. They know quite well that what we're doing is trying to reassert Western power in the Arab world by intervening in Libya, where there's a lot of oil, and that's probably the real explanation for it. And then you look at Syria, and you look at Yemen, you look all over the Middle East, you can see something really important happening. And if we are to make sense of the future, we have to work with those forces, not in terms of military intervention, but in terms of an understanding what it is they want, in much the same way as the British left worked with the Indian nationalist movement. I know the British government arrested Gandhi and all that, but there was always a body of opinion in Britain, which was the majority in the Labour Party, that said the British Empire is out of date. We've got to settle with the new nationalist movements, and that transformation from an empire into a commonwealth took place peacefully and reasonably successfully. But now these same forces are needed again. And if you look at Ireland, for example, very interesting to me, the Irish were victims of a great deal of oppression from Britain, and they fought back, and we fought the Irish, and we locked people up and all the rest of it. And now the Queen goes to the Republic and lays a wreath on the graves of people we shot when what they wanted was their independence. And so that's another confirmation that we are really on the right course as to stop the war movement. And there are so many dangers in the world. I fear the one country in the world that might use nuclear weapons would be the Israeli government. And if they used the nuclear weapons against Iran, then I think that could be the beginning of the Third World War, because at the heart of the problems in the Middle East is the treatment of Palestinians and the denial of their rights, and that has got to be at the centre of any seriously progressive policy for the Middle East and for peace. So our work has to continue. In 2003, probably many of you were there, didn't stop the Iraq war because Blair had promised Bush he would go along with whatever Bush wanted. But undoubtedly, as the situations developed, the opposition to that war grew and grew in Britain, and it did an enormous amount of damage to those who advocated it. And so in that sense, we were not as effective as we should have been, but what we were saying was right. And I think the moral argument about peace and war is one that has a considerable appeal, not just here, but in the United States and in the world. So thank you for coming. I think this is a very important meeting. I know you'll go away, as everyone does who comes to these meetings, and talks to your friends and colleagues. And when the next war begins, and you mustn't think we're at the end of the wars, because we're not, this campaign has got to take new force and new life and carry forward its argument for peace and understanding. So that's all I want to say, kind of to listen.